All right, we're here in the next video, which I call What Are My Options Really? Or since I'm talking to you, what are your options really? Now that you're in debt, you know you want to get out of debt. What options do you really have when it comes to getting out of the situation that you're in? And as always, I love to start with a quote, this one by the famous J. Paul Getty, the oil tycoon, who was at one point the richest man in the world, who said this: if you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. If you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem. If you haven't figured it out by now, I am incredibly serious about wanting to help you get out of debt. I've said it many times, as quickly and economically as possible, letting go of all the emotions, not just when you're done getting out of debt, but now, right now, so you can face it with health and confidence and emerge more successfully than if those emotions are playing on you. I want to do this so much so that I've made this course. It's literally, I'm not kidding you, it's taking me months to do it. I'm recording it now. I don't know how long it's going to be when I finish, 10, 15 hours. I want to get this information to you, and not just about debt settlement. It wouldn't be a very effective course if all I did was tell you all about debt settlement and none of the other paths that might be right for you, at least comparatively, when it comes to getting out of debt. So this section, this video, is about looking at all the ways that are available to you when it comes to eliminating your debt. I call them the 6 ways to get out of debt. When I'm done, if you can think of another, let me know. These are the 6 ways that I've noticed in my 10 plus years in debt settlement that would allow anyone to get out of debt. They are long-term payoff. Sounds just like it is. Write a check every month. Just pay off that bill for as long as it takes you to pay off your debt. Statute of limitations, which I also call total avoidance. In a little while, I'm going to go into more detail about what the statute of limitations is, but there is one in every state, at which point debt cannot legally be collected anymore. Doesn't mean that debt collectors won't try, but total avoidance is a potential way to get out of debt. Comes with problems, but it's there. Bankruptcy, which I've talked about a little and will again go into more detail on what happens when you file bankruptcy, how much it costs, what the ups and downsides are. There's using a debt consolidator. Debt consolidation is slightly different from debt settlement, so we'll go into what that means. There's using a debt settlement agency, which is the process of debt settlement. So everything you learn in this course will apply to that, only you're not doing it yourself. You're hiring another company to do it for you and paying them a fee for that service. And then there's, of course, do-it-yourself debt settlement, which I think is the easiest, fastest, most economical way. But you will see all the comparisons of each of them, again, as always, to figure out which one's right for you. And as we go through these 6 ways to get out of debt, we're going to compare each of them on the same 6 criteria. Criteria that will allow you to look at each method of getting out of debt and say, what are the upsides to this one, the downsides to another, in detail. Those 6 criteria are, how long will it take? This is a big question that a lot of people have. We know what long-term payoff could take. It could take a decade or more on some levels of debt. So we're going to find out what's the time frame in bankruptcy, what's the time frame in do-it-yourself debt settlement. We're going to talk about what the cost is going to be, how much it will cost you in interest, principal, commissions, and fees. We're going to talk about how much personal time and effort you're going to have to put in. Some of them require very little effort. Some of them require a lot of effort, constant attention. So you may decide that one that costs you more money is worth it if it costs you less time. The comparison will help you see through that. And of course, I'm going to talk about how you might feel about yourself with each of these ways. It's easy to say with long-term payoff, you might feel pretty good, very good about satisfying all that debt in full. And we've already talked about some of the negative emotions that might come along with settling a debt for less than the amount owed. So we're going to talk about each of these ways to get out of debt when it comes to how you might feel about yourself during and after the process. We're going to talk about the effect on your credit score. We've already talked about the fears that people have with their credit score dropping and how running the numbers may make it a better financial choice to allow your credit score to drop. Now we'll compare each of the 6 ways to get out of debt in terms of which might have a negative impact on your credit score and which might not, and what the differences between those are. And lastly, I'm going to talk about how much control you will have. And this might surprise you that I'm going to go into this, but I think it's a very, very important topic. In my 10 plus years working with clients and readers around debt settlement, I can tell you most people that I come across don't even think about what it means to be in control when it comes to getting out of debt. Most people feel completely out of control when they're trying to solve their debt problem. Like all the control has been taken away from them. In fact, if you're watching this course or if you've read other books by me or other books entirely on the process of debt relief, debt settlement, any of the different ways to get out of debt, you may be searching not just for a way out of debt, but for a way to regain a sense of power over your situation. I don't know if you've ever read or watched Tony Robbins. He's one of my favorite personal development coaches, leadership coaches. I find him to be very passionate and very powerful and very effective in the message that he has to deliver. And so I have to give credit to him. One of the things that Tony says about feeling out of control is that when we're in a situation in life where we feel like we don't have any control, that's where we really suffer. That we may feel pain in various situations where we feel like our life circumstances don't meet our life situation. Like right now, you never expected to be in this kind of debt, so there's pain around it. But he says the suffering comes from when we're in pain and we feel like we don't have any control. And that really resonates me. I can remember when I was in debt myself, how that lack of control left me feeling so powerless and incapable of finding a solution to my own problem. So this sixth criteria to compare the 6 ways to get out of debt is a very important one. To not just look at how much it will cost and how long it will take, how much personal effort it will require on your part or what it might do to your credit score, but to look at whether or not you're in control of the situation and you can start to unravel some of that suffering and that pain and feel empowered around it again. Debt settlement was my way of taking back control, to seeing a path towards getting out of debt that I could manage myself, that I could call the shots in, and that's when my suffering stopped. Even though I still needed to get out of debt, that's when the pain started to go away, when I took control. And let me be clear, you must choose one of these 6 ways to get out of debt. There's no other route out. I mean, I left off death because I didn't think it was something to really talk about. But short of that, paying off your debt, avoiding your debt, filing bankruptcy, doing debt consolidation, doing some form of debt settlement, whether it's through an agency or on your own, there's no other way. Even if you just ignore it, that's one of these 6 choices. Do nothing and you're making a choice. So when it comes to control, I recommend making a choice that empowers you to control the situation instead of giving up more control, which in my estimation will only lead to more pain and more suffering and make it that much more difficult to solve the problem and get out of debt. So now let's take a look at each of them, comparing each of these methods across each of these criteria so you have the full picture of all your options. Top of the list is long-term payoff. Most people, when they get into debt, when they make that first purchase on a credit card, believe that this is the route that they're going to use. I think very few people actually start to charge things believing that paying it off is not the route that they would want. It's also, depending on the amount of your debt and what your ability is to make payments every month, if you're making the minimum payment or a little more or even a little less, potentially one of the longest forms of debt elimination. It could take from several years to decades. If you want to know for sure how long it's going to take you to pay off your debt, then turn to your credit card statement. The Credit Card Act of 2009 required that all lenders put very clearly on the top of your credit card statement, right under your name and address, what your total balance is and how long it will take to pay off that balance at the minimum payment and what payment you would need to make in order to pay off that balance in 3 years, as well as how much interest you will end up paying for those options. I've put an example in here from one of my own credit card statements showing you that minimum payment warning right there in the middle, easy to see. This is a $9,500 balance, and it says that if you were to make the minimum monthly payment of $192, it would take 24 years to pay off this account. And in the end, you'd pay about double the original balance in interest. So we can see, while you may still feel that long-term payoff is the right route for you, that there is a cost in both time and money. Of course, long-term payoff by making the minimum monthly payment every month is not the only form of long-term payoff. You could pay more than the minimum payment every month, per the example that I've put in here. If you paid the amount necessary to pay off the debt in 3 years, then you would pay off the debt in 3 years. You'd pay less interest. It would, of course, require you to be able to make that above the minimum payment every month, but that is a form of long-term payoff. There's also do-it-yourself debt consolidation, which is a little different from using a debt consolidator. I'll get into that difference in a little while. Do-it-yourself debt consolidation is still long-term payoff. It just comes in the form of taking a new loan, what I call an umbrella loan, to pay off all of your existing loans and consolidate them into one account at hopefully a lower interest rate. So if you have 4, 5, 6 credit cards and you're paying 12%, 16%, 28%, 32%, all of the interest adding up between those variety of cards, keeping track of all those payments, it could take a long time, cost a lot. So there are companies out there, or you could even just open up a new credit card account if the balance that was available to you would allow you to consolidate all of your others, transfer balances into one loan, lower interest rate, lower monthly payment. That could save you a lot of money and interest over time, though how long it would take you to pay it off would still depend on whether you're making a minimum payment or more than minimum payment. That's do-it-yourself debt consolidation. And then there are other recommendations as well. Dave Ramsey recommends kind of a rolling debt payoff method where he says focus your attention on the lowest balance account first. So make as much as you can take from your monthly income, pay more than the minimum monthly due amount on that lowest balance account until it's paid off. And then take the amount that you were paying on that account and add it to the next lowest balance account, whatever the minimum monthly payment you've been paying on that. So now you're doubling or maybe tripling the payment that you're putting into that account. And when that account's paid off, take all of that kind of war chest and put it in to the next lowest balance account. And over time, you're tackling each account from the lowest balance to the highest by adding to each payment that you can make. That's another method of long-term payoff. So with that as an overview of what the long-term payoff method is, let's look at it straight across the criteria. Pardon these cards throughout this course. Some of the cards are just kind of title cards with a heading for you to grasp quickly, some tables and charts. But these cards right here, I've put a lot of information on because I know as I speak, you're going to be sitting on this card for a while, which gives you a chance to read it through. And sometimes you may just want to freeze on the card and read it and then, press play and let me keep talking. That way you can kind of scroll through the course and instantly see the piece that you want and just absorb the information without always necessarily having to listen to me again. So I hope you agree that it was a good choice to put a lot of information on these cards. In terms of time, how much time will it take? As you can see, it is potentially one of the longest forms of debt relief, especially if you're making a low monthly payment. It can take many, many years to pay off your debt in the long-term payoff method. In terms of how much it will cost you in principal, interest, commissions, and fees, it'll cost you all of it. There's no reduction in the amount of principal balance that you'll be paying off, no reduction in the amount of interest that you'll be paying off unless you do a do-it-yourself debt consolidation method, which allows you to put more debt under one lower interest card. But there will be no commissions and fees unless you miss payments. If you miss any payments, you'll pay that late fee, $29, $39 a month if you ever miss that payment, but there's no fees to an agency or anything like that, just the full balance and interest. In terms of how much time, personal time and effort it will take you, well, quite a lot. You will have to manage all of your accounts every month, keeping track of due dates, writing checks or making automatic payments, making sure they go in on time. If you're struggling to make those payments every month, then you need to stop the automatic payment to pay some other bills and then catch up to you. You have to manage that. So for whatever amount of time it takes you, from years to decades, if you're making that minimum payment, depending on the size of your balance, whatever amount of time it takes you to pay it all off, you will have to manage all of that yourself directly, which is a lot of personal effort. So how will you feel about yourself during and after the long-term payoff method of getting out of debt? I have found in my experience that most people who do pay off their debt in full feel very good about themselves when it's done. There is quite a sense of fulfillment, satisfaction. We've talked about the moral imperative that comes along with the repayment of debt. Well, if you feel that moral imperative, fulfilling it will make you feel honorable and give you a sense of integrity, which are all wonderful things. I'm not discounting at all the good feeling that comes from paying off your debt in full. It's where we all start off wanting to be, as I said. Along the way, I believe from experience that you may still feel the fear and pain and stress and maybe shame or guilt and certainly anxiety that will come along with managing and struggling through and possibly even suffering through your debt and managing your finances for those potentially many, many years of paying off your debt in the long run. So you could feel great when it's done, but still be suffering quite a bit along the way if you are struggling with your debt. The effect on your credit score, conversely, is perhaps the greatest beneficial effect of the long-term payoff method. Banks and lenders and the FICO algorithm love people who make the minimum payment every month for years. When you come through this process, your credit score will likely still be very, very high. When it's all paid off, you're going to see that 780, 800 FICO score still, I would presume. And then, of course, there's control. In this method, you have total control. You have control over making your monthly payment every month. If you do choose to do consolidation, you have control over the new loan that you choose. If you choose to do the rolling snowball method, you have control over which accounts you pay off first and how much towards each of them. You have control over making more than a minimum monthly payment when you can. You have quite a lot of control when it comes to paying off your debt in the long term. The question is, how much control will you have over your feelings, over your emotions, over your ability to deal with your debt like a business if the debt itself is still causing you pain and suffering and financial crises in your life along the way? And if so, is that worth the trade-off? This is not me telling you it's not. This is me asking you the question. Is it worth the trade-off of feeling emotionally stressed and anxious and out of control for years in order to feel good at the end about paying off your debt in the long term and still having your credit score be high? If so, if that's worth the trade-off for you, long-term payoff could be the route for you to go. But if you determine that you would rather have financial control and emotional control over your life sooner and get out of debt quicker, one of the other options we get into may be right for you. Going into the second method to get out of debt, we're going to talk about the statute of limitations. Now, if you've never heard this term, a statute of limitations doesn't only apply to debt. This is a legal term that applies to most civil and criminal crimes that say after a certain amount of time, a person is no longer subject to enforcement of the law that he or she might have broken. So if you have robbed a store and there's I'm making this up, an 8-year of statute of limitations in your state around robbing a store and 9 years have passed, prosecutors would no longer be able to prosecute you for that robbery. The statute of limitations has passed. And in debt, in most states, there is a statute of limitations that says after that time, the debt can no longer be legally collected. I am not in this course going to go through what the statute of limitations is in every state, but for the most part, you could do a Google search and find out what it is in your state for credit card debt if you wanted to look up what that statute was for you. I alternately refer to this method as total avoidance because it requires just that. It requires you to be on the run from your debt forever, not only not to make any payments, but never talk to a debt collector about your debt at all. If anybody ever calls about it, you have to entirely deny it. You can't even acknowledge that the debt exists. If you ever do, if you're ever on the phone with a debt collector and they say there's this $9,500 balance with this bank that we're trying to collect on, and you say, oh yeah, I remember that debt, the clock starts again. So as you can see, total avoidance is not an easy route to go. It would seem like just ignoring your debt might be the easiest route, the most cost-effective route. It would seem like just running from your debt might give you benefit in all these other areas. It doesn't. I believe that the total avoidance method, trying to outrun the statute of limitations, is actually the worst method that there is for getting out of debt. I don't recommend it at all in any circumstance. I would always prefer you at the very least try and negotiate a settlement with your lender or bank. To just be on the run means that you're going to be looking over your shoulder forever. And believe me, people who are out there trying to collect money and who are treating it like a business don't give up easily. They will find you and they will keep hounding you. And the stress and anxiety that I want you to let go of will likely never go away if you take zero control at all and just try and outrun your debt. But still, I'm going to go through the statute of limitations method of getting out of debt across the 6 criteria. In terms of how much time it will take, this is hands down the longest method of getting out of debt. At least in long-term payoff, even if it takes years or a decade or more, there will come a time where you have paid off your debt and are no longer dealing with the situation. if you go the route of total avoidance. Even after the statute of limitations has expired, that doesn't mean that debt collectors won't still try to collect on your debt. It means that if you were to say nothing and go to court and prove in court that the statute of limitations has expired, that they could not collect on the debt. But they will still try. They will still call. They will still send letters. So truly, you could be running from your debt forever, for your entire lifetime, if you try to just not face it at all. How much will it cost you in principal and interest and commissions and fees? Well, this one's tricky. If you're successful, if you truly do manage to outrun your debt collectors forever, it will cost you nothing except the time, effort, and anxiety that goes into trying and outrun debt collectors forever. But if they get to court, if they get a judgment against you, they have the right to continue to pursue you to collect on that judgment for as long as it takes. It could, in the end, cost you much, much more than if you were to just call your bank, negotiate a settlement, and pay it and be done with it up front. How much personal time and effort will you have to put along the way? Well, it depends on how active you are in trying to outrun your debt collectors. If you really do move to another country, go off the grid, just ignore it entirely, and nobody ever finds you, you might be able to live a life of leisure in outrunning your debt. But if you are living in normal society, working a job, getting an income, holding bank accounts, and at the same time completely ignoring your debt collectors entirely, I suspect that the amount of personal time and effort that you wind up putting in the long run will be more by the time you start dealing with the repercussions of lawsuits that you didn't show up for and debt collectors who have the right to collect on you now that you have ignored it to the point where it has come back to haunt you. If you haven't noticed, I do not recommend the total avoidance route of getting out of debt, but I'm here to explain it to you so that you can see all of your options. How will you feel about yourself during and after the run for the statute of limitations? Honestly, I really can't say. Guessing, I would imagine in some people there might be a sense of self-satisfaction that comes from avoiding debt to the point where the debt collectors just give up and you feel like you've won. But I work more on the if you're suffering from pain and stress and anxiety and guilt and shame road, that taking control to alleviate those emotions is a more powerful way to deal with your debt and give yourself and your future a brighter outcome. So that I would think living with those emotions forever would make me at least feel much worse about myself along the way than I do actually facing my debt, owning it, discussing it, and coming to a legal arrangement with my bank and lenders. Next is the effect on your credit score, which we can all see will be terrible in the total avoidance route. Again, making no judgment on a person. Credit score has nothing to do with who you are as a human being. But if you're just comparing the numbers and you're looking at which routes will be beneficial to your credit score and which will be detrimental to your credit score, if you don't make payments on your credit card forever and go into collections that you don't respond to forever and remain in arrears forever, your credit score is going to be impacted negatively on an ongoing basis until there is some resolution to the situation. Unlike long-term payoff or even debt settlement, if you're just going for total avoidance where there is no resolution at all, the effect on your credit score will remain negative forever. As for control, I'm going to go maybe contrary to the obvious here. On the surface, it may look like you have total control over your debt if you're the one choosing to not answer the phone, not respond to letters, not show up to court dates, that you are taking control in the I'm not going to do anything sense. If you haven't noticed, I kind of think it's the opposite. I think if you avoid it, you're giving up all control to everybody who's going to come hound you to collect on that debt forever. Again, my recommendation, whether it's long-term payoff, bankruptcy, a debt consolidator, debt settlement, some other road with a variety of control or handing it over to others to find a resolution, will give you more of a sense of completion around your debt situation than abandoning it altogether. So that's the statute of limitations route. You've certainly heard me say several times now, I do not recommend it at all, but I want you to have the information so that you can compare it to the others that we are going through. Next is bankruptcy. I personally have never filed bankruptcy. I learned about bankruptcy from my bankruptcy attorney when I first got into debt and was looking for a solution. He told me about bankruptcy. He told me about debt settlement. Because I have never filed bankruptcy and never gone through that process, I have no personal experience to relate to you. I am not an expert on bankruptcy. If you are thinking about filing bankruptcy, I beseech you, talk to a bankruptcy attorney, talk to your financial advisor, talk to your accountant. There are innumerable repercussions and actions and reactions and consequences and things to do that I do not know about and cannot inform you of. So get more expert advice than I can offer. The best that I can do is relay to you, for the purposes of this course, my understanding of the bankruptcy process to use it as a balance against the other information that I'm delivering. In 2005, President Bush signed the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act, which addressed bankruptcy specifically and made it more difficult for more borrowers to file what's called Chapter 7 bankruptcy. In Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you could have debts entirely expunged and push those people through a series of test criteria that they were measured against towards Chapter 11 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which require structured payoffs of your debt over time. Although any bankruptcy would still put an end to all collection attempts and phone calls and legal proceedings if you were in one. As I understood it from my bankruptcy attorney, even Chapter 7 bankruptcy would now no longer allow for a debt to just be completely wiped away through the bankruptcy process. Instead, as I was described it, filing bankruptcy now puts you into a sort of financial receivership, my attorney's term, not mine, where the court assigns sort of a super creditor to your financial life. And that super creditor now has the right to go through all of your finances, all of your bank accounts, all of your assets, all of your holdings, all of your debt, all of your income, and make determinations by him or herself as to what assets can be disposed of and what money from that can be used to pay off your debts. So filing bankruptcy doesn't just make your debt go away, it just turns over the solution of your credit card debt to the court. I understand in every jurisdiction, in every state, there are different limitations to how much you're allowed to keep. At the time that I was looking at bankruptcy in California, around 2008, 2009, I was told you could keep $22,000 in cash and a car worth up to $3,000. That may or may not be the case now or in your jurisdiction. But for me, it became a numbers game. When I learned about debt settlement, I was able to say, if I go through this process of debt settlement, will that leave me with more assets at the end of the process or less? And if I do it myself, will I be more successful at it? Or will bankruptcy handle the situation better for me? As I understood it, the 2005 Act was intended to stop borrowers who had a tremendous amount of debt, but also a tremendous amount of assets, from filing bankruptcy to have their debt wiped away while they retained possession of all their assets. Frankly, I understand that. I have said my course is not for people who make a great income and are capable of handling their debt in the way that they intended to when they started. I'm not encouraging people to use debt settlement to alleviate debts that they could otherwise pay comfortably and still take care of their life in a financially responsible way. And it's fairly clear that the law favors lenders when it comes to a borrower who has a high amount of debt and a high amount of assets. On the other hand, if somebody has a high amount of debt and no assets, the bankruptcy law clearly favors the borrower. Because in this case, somebody would be able to turn their financial life over to the super creditor, who would see that there are no assets to pay off the debt, and therefore the creditors wouldn't get anything for their debt. This is a negotiating point when it comes to negotiating settlements with your lenders. If you truly are in a situation where you may file bankruptcy because you have very little or no assets, and the lender recognizes that if you do file bankruptcy, they're going to get nothing for their debt, reaching a settlement, even if it's a lower one, is to their benefit. So this is why I do these 6 ways to get out of debt and compare them across all the criteria, because what each one has is reflected in the other when it comes to making a choice. And before we get into the 6 criteria directly, I also want to point out that bankruptcy is a court proceeding, which means when you file bankruptcy, it is now part of the public record compared to something like debt settlement, which is a private proceeding between parties. And unless you were to publicize your debt settlement negotiations with a lender, they would remain private. So with all that said, as kind of an introduction to bankruptcy, what it is and how it works, let's look at it across the 6 criteria. First, how much time will it take? In theory, this could be one of the quickest processes for getting out of debt for you, in that from the moment you file bankruptcy, if you meet the test criteria and you are approved by the court to do so, it would stop all collection attempts and court proceedings and lawsuits immediately. So from your perspective, it would happen very, very quickly. How long the court is actually engaged in your bankruptcy in terms of selling off your assets to pay off your debts could take quite a while longer. I have no idea how long for you because I don't know what your situation is and what assets you have to sell and what debts you have to put them against. But that process could take a while. Your process in terms of filing bankruptcy and being relieved of the collection attempts would happen very quickly. How much will it cost in principal and interest and commissions and fees? There's a fee associated with filing bankruptcy, which may be anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s in your city or state. You will have attorney's fees when it comes to the filing. I know there are some online bankruptcy filing services that will just do the paperwork for you inexpensively. If you were to actually hire an attorney to do it for you, that hourly rate might cost more. If you have to go to court and have an attorney with you, that hourly rate might cost more. In terms of how much it will cost you in principal and interest, I can't say. Again, it depends on how much assets you have to pay down your debt and how much your state or jurisdiction allows you to keep. But for the most part, I would expect filing bankruptcy to cost you a good portion of your assets in settling out your debt. If you have no assets, it's going to cost you a lot less. The purpose of bankruptcy these days isn't to alleviate the debt. It's to alleviate the collection attempts and the lawsuits that will no longer apply, but the debt itself will still be paid off by the court from your assets. How much time and effort personally for you will it take? Some. Bankruptcy doesn't happen on its own. You will need to do the paperwork to file your bankruptcy. With that will go a full accounting of your assets and debts and income. You'll see in a few more videos when we start getting in to the Easy Business Plan that I have you do a full accounting of your life. So if you go through this entire course, especially the second time through where you actually do everything and you complete that full accounting of your life, your bankruptcy attorney will thank you because you will have all of that paperwork done and prepared and make it very easy for him or her to discuss with you how a bankruptcy might apply to you. So you have all that information prepared for you in this course, but you'll have to do it anyway if you file bankruptcy. How will you feel about yourself in filing bankruptcy? Again, this is going to be a personal choice. As I said earlier, I believe that a lot of people have been wrongfully burdened with a sense of shame around using a legal, legitimate method of getting out of debt. I have no judgment for anybody who files bankruptcy. It's a strategy. As I've said, businesses use it all the time. So if you are using it as a strategy and you've run the numbers like the CEO of the corporation of you, if you're treating it like a business and it's the business choice you make, I don't feel you should have any negative emotions around it at all. On the other hand, if you're watching me thinking, oh, I do feel a little bit of, I don't know about bankruptcy, then I, of course, would recommend that you work through those emotions in the chapter that we're going to do later about emotions, so that if you do choose bankruptcy, or for whatever choice you make, that you're making it from the choice of a business person running the numbers like a business and not letting emotion guide you one way or the other. The effect on your credit score will be drastic and poor. Bankruptcy goes onto your credit report. My understanding is that it stays there for 7 years. I've heard that from bankruptcy attorneys. I encourage you to talk to your financial advisor or bankruptcy attorney about what it might be, so you can weigh that into the choice you make about whether or not bankruptcy is the right route for you. And lastly, that brings me to how much control you will have, which is none. Once you've filed your bankruptcy, you are turning your financial life over to the courts, who will be entirely responsible for determining which assets to keep, which assets to sell, how to distribute the money gained from the sale of any asset. You will no longer have any control over what happens in your financial life. So to me, even on the other end of your bankruptcy, even when you emerge from your bankruptcy, I believe that the negative emotions you may be suffering now, any pain or fear or anxiety or guilt around being in debt or the stress of dealing with the debt, that just filing bankruptcy and turning your financial life over to somebody else will not necessarily alleviate that. All that said, under the right circumstances, with the advice of a qualified bankruptcy attorney and your financial advisors, filing bankruptcy is a strategy and may be the right strategy for you if you go through the 6 criteria and determine that the criteria of bankruptcy are the best for your situation. Using a debt consolidator is different from do-it-yourself debt consolidation, which, as I said earlier, is a form of long-term payoff. A debt consolidator cannot give you a jumbo loan to combine all of your credit cards into at a lower interest rate. These businesses are not banks. They are not lenders. They are not subject to the laws and regulations that a bank or lender is subject to. They can't charge interest. Even a company that is offering you a jumbo loan and calling itself a debt consolidator, by my definition, is not a debt consolidator. They're a lender offering you a new loan. They're just labeling themselves a debt consolidator, but I want to be really specific for you about the difference. Don't be fooled by a company calling it a debt consolidator, which is actually a lender, because the consolidation in this point is not to your benefit the way consolidating your debt yourself is. When you're consolidating your debt yourself, you're choosing long-term payoff that keeps your credit score high, gives you a lot of control over the situation, and potentially gets you to pay off your debt at a lower interest rate because you've put all of your loans together into one place. That is not what a debt consolidator does. A debt consolidator actually takes advantage of debt settlement. What a debt consolidator does is they say to you, instead of paying your principal balance and interest to the bank for many, many years, in the example I used earlier, a $9,500 balance at $192 minimum payment a month would take more than 20 years to pay off and cost another $9,500 in interest. The debt consolidator will say to you, give me the $9,500 balance, only the balance, in monthly payments over a much shorter amount of time, because if you're not paying the interest, you will have the total balance paid off much more quickly. But at the same time, they are calling your lender and negotiating a settlement on your debt, probably for around 50%. They're not going to try and get down into the 35, 25% range because it takes too long and is too much effort. Their goal is not to squeeze every penny out of it. Their goal is to have you pay them $9,500 over time for them paying your bank half that up front. That is how a debt consolidator works. Different from a lender offering you a debt consolidation loan. A debt consolidator is negotiating a settlement on your debt with your lender for about half and then having you pay your entire debt back to them without the interest over time. So you can see there could be a great benefit of this to you. You don't have to come up with the upfront settlement payment and you don't pay all of the interest. So in the end, you could be paying it off much sooner and at maybe half the amount when you don't pay off the interest. But you're also paying a service, a premium, in order to call up your bank and negotiate a settlement with them, which you can actually do yourself for much less than you would pay the consolidator to do for you. So in the end, using a debt consolidator might be a good choice for you if you don't want to put in the time and effort and you don't mind paying more up front compared to debt settlement, where it costs you more time and effort but could also save you a lot more money on the back end. In terms of how long it will take, this is not bankruptcy. You are not alleviated of having to deal with your debt right from the beginning, but it's also not long-term payoff because you are not paying the principal and interest for many, many years. I couldn't say the exact amount of time it would take. It would depend on your balance and what the monthly payment that the debt consolidator tells you have to pay in order to do this business deal with them. But whatever that payment is, divided into your balance without interest, will be how long it will take you to get out of debt. How much will it cost in principal, interest, fees, and commissions? Well, it's going to cost you all of the principal, not the interest. I will put in a little caveat here that every debt consolidator is a little different. So some of them might throw in a fee on top of the principal. They can't charge interest, but they may say it's $9,500 plus $1,000 for the service of having us do the debt consolidation for you. So look out for that. So it may cost you some fees, or they could call it a commission, but it's not going to cost you as much as paying it off in long term to your lender at the full interest. How much personal time and effort will it cost? Well, less than having many accounts spread over many different lenders, certainly. Again, you still have to maintain your monthly payment to the consolidator. But if you have 5, 6, 7 accounts and you're transferring them all to the debt consolidator, now you're only managing one account. You're not having to track interest. So you're still managing your finances over that long term, but it may be easier for you to do than managing them with all of your lenders. Then it may allow you to manage your life a little bit more effectively as well. How will you feel about yourself along the way? Probably good when it's done. There's certainly a great feeling that comes to eliminating your debt no matter which route you choose, except statute of limitations, which I don't believe in. I felt great when all of my debt was settled and I was debt-free, and I imagine you will too in any of these methods and in the route of using a debt consolidator. Along the way, again, I can't say. It depends on how much you're able to manage the financial stress of your life while making the monthly payments to the debt consolidator. If you are struggling along the way and still suffering from any of the fear or stress or anxiety that comes with it, then you may be living with those emotions for a long time until you get to that final payoff, which, like bankruptcy, may or may not have you feel like you've really worked through the emotions, because again, you haven't fully taken control over the process. You've just turned the process over to a third party for you. The effect on your credit score will be negative. It likely will be a little less negative than debt settlement, which I'll get into in a moment. But when you think about it, if the consolidator is paying off a settlement to your lender up front, it means from the lender's perspective, that account is now settled. It's not delinquent over many, many months or years while you're going through negotiations. So the effect on your credit score will be low because you are settling out your debt for less than the amount owed, but likely not as low as a longer form of debt settlement, such as doing it yourself or even using a debt settlement agency, which we'll get into in a moment. And lastly, that brings us to control. I don't see a lot of control in the using a debt consolidator route. You have control over which debt consolidation company you choose, and that's it. Your consolidator then chooses to negotiate at what amount or what level they settle with your lender. They're going to dictate you the terms of the payback, whatever the fees or commissions are, and whatever the monthly amount is. Maybe you can negotiate it a little bit, but not much. If you pay a little less, it'll take a little longer to pay off. If you pay a little more, it'll take a little shorter to pay off. Maybe there's some leeway in there for that, but you're still going to have to make that payment to that debt consolidator every month, which doesn't really allow you to bring a solution to your situation. So I see less control in the using a debt consolidator route than going through debt settlement, but maybe a little bit more control than, say, filing bankruptcy, where you've turned it all over to the court. And that's what using a debt consolidator is. Again, different from do-it-yourself debt consolidation, but a viable route for many people who feel they don't necessarily want to put in the time and effort of do-it-yourself debt settlement. If you are willing to pay more upfront to have the consolidator negotiate with your bank at their settlement rate instead of you negotiating with your bank at a lower settlement rate for yourself. Okay, let's talk about using a debt settlement agency. The problem for many borrowers, once they get past self-judgment and the fear of talking to debt collectors and the fear of being sued and the fear of their credit score going down, even if they're at the point where they think, hey, this debt settlement route may be right for me, is that many think they either will not be successful at it or they don't have the time to properly do it. As you continue through this Debt Settlement Easy Business Plan course, you're going to learn all about what there is to do. So I think that will alleviate the fears of not being successful at it. You're going to work through all of the top 5 fears and the judgment and all of the emotions. So I think that'll alleviate the emotional aspect of feeling uncertain about debt settlement. But that still leaves us with time. A lot of people will go through this course, see what the time involvement aspect of do-it-yourself debt settlement is, and decide that while you believe debt settlement is the right route for you to getting out of debt quickly and economically, that you don't want to do it for yourself, which brings us to debt settlement agencies. Unlike using a debt consolidator, to whom you will owe your debt in full after they pay it off by half in settlement to your lender, a debt settlement agency is not making any settlement payment to your lender. They are not fronting any money in the resolution of your debt. A debt settlement agency only takes the role of talking to your creditors to negotiate the settlement on your behalf. In my experience, there are two kinds of debt settlement agencies, one legitimate, the other fraudulent. And even in the case of the legitimate agencies, neither are necessarily working with your best interests in mind. Even a legitimate debt settlement agency that can provide a reasonably valuable service is still a business in business for its interests. And as you'll see, those are not necessarily in alignment with yours. We will talk about the legitimate agencies first so you can really get a sense of what this service is. And then at the end, I'll point out to you what the fraudulent agencies are and how to make sure you watch out for them and don't do business with them. Generally speaking, using a debt settlement agency is going to cost you more than settling your debts yourself. Customarily, their commissions range between 10 to 20% of the total amount of debt settled. Not the settlement amount, the total amount of debt you had when you went to them asking them to start settling out your debt, which means for a $50,000 debt, their commission will be $5,000 to $10,000, money that I believe you could be putting towards a settlement negotiated directly with your creditor instead of paying it to a middleman for doing it for you. The other way using a debt settlement agency costs you more than doing debt settlement yourself is, as I said, their interests are not the same as yours. Their interest is to get in and out of this deal as quickly as possible, make their profit, and move on to the next customer, which means they are not likely to want to spend the amount of time it takes to get a lender to settle at, say, 30 to 35%, as you could do if you were to take more months doing it on your own. They will likely get an offer in the 50% range and then recommend it to you as a very good offer. They may even start using your fears against you and saying things like, this is a great offer, it's not going to be on the table forever, you should take it, we can't guarantee they're going to keep offering it after a while. They want you to take that 50% offer in a month or two because they don't want to spend 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 months trying to get down to 35%. But let's look at the numbers. If you were to negotiate a 35% settlement with your bank directly on that same $50,000 debt I talked about, you'd pay about $17,000 total settlement on the $50,000 account. If your debt settlement agency recommends you take a 50% settlement, you're now spending $25,000 in settlement to your lender and that 10 or 20% $5,000 or $10,000 commission to the agency. So you've now spent $30,000 or $35,000 to settle your $50,000 debt instead of $17,000 that you could have done on your own. That is quite a premium to pay to somebody to do it for you. You would really have to be in the position of having more money and less time to feel that using a debt settlement agency, even a legitimate one, is going to be in your best interest. And in my experience, most people who are suffering under the burden of credit card debt have more of a luxury of time and less of money, which could, if you do it yourself, give you the ability to settle for less cash than an agency is going to do on your behalf, trying to get out of the deal as quickly as they can to increase their profit margin. All debt settlement agencies essentially offer the same service, but when you're dealing with a reputable one, the thing to note is that they will not ask for any money up front. The debt settlement agency will negotiate with your lender. When they reach a settlement offer from the lender that you approve, even if they recommend you take a higher one than you could get on your own, when you approve it, you will send them all of the money for the settlement amount, including their fee. They will deduct their fee from the amount that you've sent them and act as a pass-through for the settlement amount to go through your lender. That is the role of a reputable debt settlement agency. Now let's look at the fraudulent agency, and I really want you to pay careful attention here because the simple truth is these companies are a scam. They will come out like the same service as a legitimate debt settlement agency. They will say they work for a 10 to 20% commission. They will call your lender and negotiate a settlement for you. But instead of, like the legitimate debt settlement agency who takes all of the money and their commission after the settlement is reached just to close the deal, a fraudulent debt settlement agency will require you to send monthly payments to them to build up this debt settlement fund that they will then use to pay your lender. You're going to be sending them $400, $500, $600 a month as they build up this settlement fund, which you can see will take many, many years to do. And they front load their commission, which means if you put $5 or $7 or $8 or $10,000 into that fund that you've sent to them, and then determine for circumstances in your life that you just can't keep making that payment anymore and that you're never going to be able to reach enough to settle with your bank, they're going to keep the $10,000 fee that they've front loaded without ever doing anything for you. So please, if you're considering using a debt settlement agency, and there are many, many options to choose from, you'll see dozens of them listed on any Google search, research them all carefully. And if you ever come across one who wants you to fill up their bank account in advance and take their fee, whether or not they ever reach a settlement with your lender, pass and move on to somebody else. Only work with a debt settlement agency who gets paid upon completion of the negotiation. Now let's take a look at debt settlement agencies across the 6 criteria. How long will it take? Well, debt settlement is a faster process, certainly than long-term payoff, certainly than total avoidance, running for the statute of limitations. It's quicker than debt consolidation, where you're paying off the debt consolidator for years at a monthly payment. Debt settlement can be the fastest route to eliminating your debt right up front. And using an agency can even be faster than doing debt settlement yourself, primarily because the agency is going to encourage you to settle at a higher amount. I've seen people get 50% offers within a few weeks to a couple of months of being delinquent on their accounts and asking for a settlement offer. Whereas getting into the what I consider to be the kind of unofficial industry average of 35% might take 6-12 months, a year and a half. Definitely takes more time to get to those lower numbers that are possible when you do it yourself. You still need to have the money, of course, for the settlement. We're going to get into a lot of detail later on in the course about how to raise that money, even when you think there's no way to raise that money, and how long it takes. So that will affect the amount of time that it takes to settle, even using a debt settlement agency, even settling a higher amount. You need to take the time to save that debt settlement fund. But ultimately, as I said, using a debt settlement agency, if you're willing to settle at a higher amount, could be one of the fastest ways to eliminate your debt. How much will using a debt settlement agency cost in principal and interest, fees, and commissions? Well, we've talked a little bit about it. It's going to cost, at the end of the day, probably 65% of your total debt if you go with the debt settlement agency's recommendation of around a 50% settlement, plus their 10 to 20% commission, whether they call it a fee or a commission, which is more than do-it-yourself debt settlement, less than using a debt consolidator who's going to want you to pay off 100% of your balance, even though they're saving you the interest, far less than using long-term payoff. It's hard to estimate bankruptcy without knowing what your situation is, but debt settlement using an agency is still one of the most cost-effective ways of eliminating your debt from the start. How much personal time and effort will you have to put in? Some, but not a ton. Again, unlike do-it-yourself debt settlement, which we'll get into in a moment, you will not be the one making the calls to your bank or lender to negotiate settlements. You can really remove yourself from the process, which means the only effort and time that you have to put in is choosing your debt settlement agency and making whatever structured payments to yourself or savings that you have to do in order to save that debt settlement fund while they are negotiating your settlement. How you feel about yourself, both during and after the process of using a debt settlement agency, is going to vary from person to person, obviously. As with using a debt consolidator, you may feel quite good when that final payment's made and you've eliminated your debt. Along the way, Using an agency while your accounts are delinquent does not relieve you of receiving phone calls from debt collectors. So if you are feeling stressed about the process of debt settlement, but you've turned the process over to the agency, you're now in the position of getting phone calls from debt collectors that you can't do anything about. You're not negotiating with them directly. You're using an agency to negotiate with them. So here you are receiving calls from debt collectors who want you to make a payment on your account, who want you to get current on your account, who may even be trying to negotiate with you. But since you've turned that process over to somebody else, from my perception, the relief that comes from managing the process on your own is not there. So you may still feel the pain, fear, stress, anxiety along the way until you get to that final payoff, where the final payoff for you may be eventually relieving the emotions that go along with the debt. So how you feel about yourself along the way will vary, but I suspect still be difficult if you're turning the process over to somebody else to do for you. The primary negative effect on your credit score comes from being delinquent on your payments. Again, it's not me telling you that you have to miss payments to negotiate a settlement. It's your bank who makes you do that. And each month that you are delinquent, your credit report will reflect a delinquent account or a missed payment, and that will negatively affect your credit score. Interestingly, when that final payment is made, you get a little bump in your credit score because your account will now read closed, even if it reads paid for less than amount owed. That reflects better in the FICO algorithm than delinquent or in arrears. So you get a little bump at the end of the day when you actually do make that debt settlement payment. It's a little better than bankruptcy because bankruptcy stays on your accounts for, I think it's 7 years, whereas debt settlement is not a court procedure. It's just the amount of time that those delinquent accounts remain on your credit report, which tend to drop off over time, and with the use of a reputable credit repair agency, which I'll talk about a little bit all the way at the end of this course, could even be done more quickly. So there's your credit score. You're going to see a drop in your credit score, but as we saw in the last section, that may be worth it if you believe the money you save is a benefit to your life and your situation. And lastly, that brings us to how much control you will have using a debt settlement agency. None. Obviously, like with a debt consolidator, you will get to choose the agency you work with, a reputable one, not me. And you will ultimately get to say yes or no to whatever settlement offers that the bank or lender the agency is negotiating with makes before they accept on your behalf. But that's about it. You're not going to be involved in those negotiations. And as you'll see when we get into the actual steps of the Debt Settlement Easy Business Plan, those negotiations are a crucial element for both you treating debt settlement like a business unemotionally and the effect that that can have both on the final settlement amount reached and the relief of the emotions that you feel along the way. So that level of control that, as we'll see in a moment, do-it-yourself debt settlement will give you, using an agency will not, because you are turning control over to another entity to handle that process for you. Lastly, though, on this, I will say it may be a viable route for you. Again, if you have a little more money and a little less time and you don't feel like you're capable, even though at the end of this course, I think you will feel very capable of negotiating directly with your creditor. If you feel that you want somebody else to do that for you and you're willing to pay a premium for their service, maybe twice as much as you would pay directly to your lender to settle the same account, talk to your accountant, talk to your bankruptcy attorney. It might be a viable route for you to eliminate your debt much more quickly than certainly long-term payoff or using a consolidator, and maybe even more economically than filing bankruptcy, which will use all of your assets to pay off your debts. And that brings us to my favorite, obviously, do-it-yourself debt settlement. And for no small reason, I've already given you some numbers after the situation I explained where my business partner died and the movie I made didn't sell. I financed it myself, and the 2008 market crash happened, and here I was left with this mountain of debt. Took back control, treated my debt like a business, became the CEO of the corporation of me, negotiated directly with my lenders, settled out 8 credit card accounts with 7 different major U.S. banks. Ultimately, I had over $150,000 in debt written off entirely. I've included several more of my settlement agreements here for you to take a look at. The $76,000 account for $25,000, a $39,000 account for $15,000, $22,000 account for $5,000, a 22% settlement, my best, though it took the longest. I did all of this myself, negotiating directly with my creditors. And as I will take you through, I feel this was both the quickest, most economical, and best way to give me the most control over my own debt situation so that I could treat it as a business, become the CEO of the corporation of me, and reach results that I don't believe I would have reached had I turned over the process to a third party, either the court or an agency or a consolidator. And as you saw earlier, so many of my readers and clients have had similar results. As always, I have to say, will you have the same results? No, you won't have the same results. You will have your results. And depending on how much effort and energy and time you put into both letting go of the emotions of debt and focusing on doing it yourself, I believe results like this, I've seen results like this happen and want them to happen for you as well. Let's go through the criteria on do-it-yourself debt settlement, starting with how long will it take? This varies, of course, depending on how many accounts you have and what level of settlement you're trying to reach. I've seen myself and others get offers for 50 to 60% settlement ranges very quickly, sometimes a few weeks to a couple of months after going delinquent on an account. And if you're looking to settle in the 50 to 60% range, I believe it's possible that your bank could agree to such a settlement in a short order. I've seen it happen many times, which is why I believe that. If you are going for a deeper settlement, I consider, as I've said, the kind of unofficial industry average when pursuing debt settlement to be about 35%. That usually comes in the 6 to 12 months range. Not always. Everything's going to vary. There are a lot of different factors that a bank weighs into your personal situation. But my accounts and so many of my readers and clients have seen 30 to 40%, 35% in the middle offers in the 6 to 12 month range. Sometimes a little longer. It can go up to 18. Sometimes if you go to 18 to 24, you can get a little lower, maybe 25%. I have seen settlements below 25%. I don't consider them common, and I do think they take much longer, maybe 2 years or more, and there are other factors and repercussions that can come in if you go that long, like getting sued. So that 35% sweet spot, I'll call it, in 6 to 12, maybe a little bit more, maybe up to 18 months, is I have found a very reasonable expectation of the amount of time it will take to reach a reasonably average settlement offer. How much will do-it-yourself debt settlement cost you in principal and interest, costs and fees? Well, other than perhaps a bankruptcy where you have no assets to put towards your debt, I believe that do-it-yourself debt settlement has the very best potential of all of the methods of getting out of debt to get you the lowest possible cost. If you look at that $50,000 balance example that I gave earlier and you were to settle at $17,000 at 35%, that's saving $33,000 off the principal. And if you look at some of the examples we gave earlier in why it works to let your credit score drop, that might mean another $50,000 in interest that you would save when you put in the time and effort to get that settlement in the 30, 35, 40% range without paying a third party their commissions. Now, along the way, you're looking at interest accruing while you are negotiating, but then when you settle, you will settle on the interest that accrued as well. You're going to incur some late fees when it comes to not paying your monthly bills. Those will be tacked on to your total balance and become part of the settlement later on when you do settle in full to reach what I still believe is the best possible economic outcome for debt relief in a short amount of time. How much personal effort and time will that take within that time frame? A lot. Perhaps the most of all of the choices. Even though long-term payoff will take much longer, in long-term payoff, your only effort is to write your check every month. Bankruptcy, you're turning it over to the courts to handle for you using a debt consolidator, using a debt settlement agency. You're turning it over to those third parties to handle for you. Do-it-yourself debt settlement is exactly what it says. It's doing it yourself. As we go forward into the Easy Business Plan, you're going to see all of the effort that it requires doing your full accounting of your entire financial life, putting together a system of files to make sure that everything's organized. Of course, the negotiating and the phone calls, talking to collection agents. You are going to do all of that, which may sound daunting, but like I've always said, keep watching this course. Read the book as an adjunct. You will see that the effort you have to put in is so valuable in terms of teaching you how to be the CEO of the corporation of you. And in many respects, so worthwhile when you take on that role that doing this work becomes fun. Yes, I said it. I know it may not seem like it to you at the moment, but for me and for so many of my readers whose letters you saw earlier, it can be fun to talk to your debt collectors, to talk to your banks and lenders, negotiating on your own behalf, taking that control, putting them behind the 8 ball, and seeing the results. So while do-it-yourself debt settlement takes the most personal time and effort out of all the ways to get out of debt, it is also by far the most rewarding, both personally and financially. What will the effect be on your credit score? Detrimental. We've talked about that. As you are delinquent on your accounts, especially multiple accounts for 6, 12, 18 months, every one of those account delinquencies will be reported to your credit bureaus as a missed payment, and that is going to lower your credit score a little bit at a time. I saw about a 200-point drop in my credit score over the course of my entire sequence of negotiations and successful settlements. As I mentioned earlier, each time that one is reported to your credit bureau as closed, settled for less than the amount owed, that will be a little bump to your credit score compared to it being delinquent. And when they are all closed, that will reflect positively in your credit score. Even that said, your credit score will remain low for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. As you start to rebuild credit, it can rebound. Certainly using a reputable credit repair agency, which I will describe later on, can help it rebound. But yes, the trade-off for having all of that control, doing the negotiations yourself, coming to the lowest possible financial settlement for the benefit of your corporation does have a negative impact on your credit score. But the best part about the whole credit score conversation, as we've already seen, is that even though your credit score is going to take a hit, you're doing it from a place of choice because you know that using your credit score as a tool in order to save money, because you don't need it as a tool to get low interest rates right now, is the right thing to do for the corporation of you. So you're going to watch your credit score fall, not from a place of, oh my gosh, I've used a debt consolidator and look at my credit score go down while I'm trying to get out of debt more quickly. You're going to look at it and say, I did this intentionally because I know that doing this is the best thing for the corporation of me to save money. And that's an entirely different place to come from when looking at your credit score decline than from any of the other ways of getting out of debt, where it's a consequence that you probably would still rather not have occur. So it's the empowerment of choosing to use your credit score as a tool to reach the outcome that you want that makes this section of your credit score falling more beneficial to you as you become the CEO of the corporation of you. How will you feel about yourself along the way? Well, we have to break it down into steps. Before the process, as in now, as in right now, while you're watching this video, taking this course, you may still be feeling doubt, skepticism, the top 5 fears of debt settlement and others, fear of the unknown, fear of the consequences, all of those resonations of judgment and rightness and wrongness and what looking sued gets like might be boiling up inside you. So you could be feeling all of that right now as you choose which route is the best for you to eliminate your debt. As you go through it, I truly believe that as you start applying the steps, not just the tangible steps, but the emotional steps, the empowerment steps of the Do-It-Yourself Bailout Debt Settlement Easy Business Plan, as you start treating debt like a business as the CEO of the corporation of you, that you will start feeling great. I really do believe that. I believe that you're going to start having that feeling while you're watching this course, even before it's done, even before you've done all the steps or started negotiating, that as you get the knowledge I'm going to deliver, as you feel informed about the process and I shine the light on that dark tunnel of debt settlement and finance for you, that you will start feeling better about yourself right now and using that feeling of empowerment and confidence to move into your future, to move into your own debt settlement journey with strength and courage and a lightness that you might not have felt possible prior to actually getting out of the debt. And then, well, you don't even have to wait until the final settlement like you do with a debt consolidator or a debt settlement agency to get that real emotional payoff, because you're going to feel it every time you get an offer. Not even the last offer. When you get the first offer, 85% that you know you're going to pass on, you're going to say, wow, this works. They're negotiating with me. And when you hold your ground and say no and they come down to 55%, you're going to say, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. And when you reach that 35% range, if that's your target and you actually settle and you get your first settlement agreement, you're going to send that check in with a smile because you're going to have done it for yourself. I can't emphasize this enough. I felt it every time I settled an account for myself. I felt it every time a reader told me that they did. The feeling of empowerment, doing it for yourself, cannot be duplicated using any third-party agency, filing bankruptcy and turning it over to the court. I believe it won't have the same feeling as getting into it yourself and negotiating for yourself and reaching a better financial outcome for the corporation of you through your own empowerment and knowledge and information and courage and action and effort. I believe that about do-it-yourself debt settlement, and I believe as you continue through this course, you will see that benefit also. So, how much control will you have using do-it-yourself debt settlement? Well, here you go. All of it. You have all of the control. All of it. You control every step of the process. You control when you want to stop making payments on one card or another card. You control when you want to pick up the phone to talk to a debt collector or not. You control when you want to make an offer or accept their offer. You control where the conversation goes, as we'll see when I get into negotiations, and how you can flip the script on the debt collector and turn the conversation to your advantage instead of letting them use the emotions of debt against you. You control when you want to settle. You control what money you send. All of this control stays in your hands. You're not turning the negotiations over to a debt settlement agency. You are not allowing a consolidator to settle your debt for half and then paying them off the entire balance. You're not turning your financial life over to the courts to make decisions for you. You're not running away where you're taking no control whatsoever. You're not giving the bank exactly what they want, which is paying off your debt in full at interest in the long term. You are taking all of the control that a CEO would take of his or her company in order to pursue the best financial outcome. And I can tell you from experience that taking that control feels great. It empowers you. You start having fun. As I just said, you actually start looking forward to calls with collection agents who in the past you might have been fearful about, because you're coming at it from such a position of control, such a position of confidence and knowledge and all the information you're going to gain in this course, and you are putting them behind the 8 ball, and all of that control based in Anthony Robbins' model that we discussed earlier starts to make the pain and the suffering go away, because you know you are doing something proactively to alleviate your debt yourself. That control, as I started off saying, is the key factor in negotiating the best possible financial outcome as quickly as possible so you feel the best about yourself and your future. Whether you choose this route or not, I believe it will be hard for you to deny that taking control doesn't give you the empowerment and that feeling of accomplishment that may just put you over the top when it comes to succeeding at this. So there you have it. This video is titled, What Are My Options Really? What are your options really? And I've taken you through not just the 6 criteria of do-it-yourself debt settlement, but what I believe are all of your options for getting out of debt. Whether you pay it off in the long term, whichever route towards long-term payoff you choose, minimum payments every month, more than the minimum payments every month, do-it-yourself debt consolidation where you get that jumbo loan, or the rolling snowball payoff, one account at a time, or if you shoot for the statute of limitations, file bankruptcy and turn your finances over to the court, use a debt consolidator to negotiate the settlement on your debt and then have you pay them the principal but not the interest, use a debt settlement agency, a reputable one, to negotiate on your behalf, or do it yourself. I don't know of another route out of debt than these. If you found one or can think of one, write to me, Kenny at thedoityourselfbailout.com. I'd love to hear about it. I'll research it. Maybe I'll put it into my next book or the next video. But for now, these are your options. So whether do-it-yourself debt settlement is the right route for you or one of the others, if you are struggling, if you are suffering in your debt right now, if you do not see a way out, if you can't manage your finances, if you are making choices, difficult choices about where to put whatever limited assets you have, whatever limited income you have towards your real expenses in life, your rent and food and clothing and taking care of your children and paying off a credit card, and that's taking up so much percentage of your assets and your income, you have to make some choice to deal with that. You can't just avoid it. If you do, that's a choice. Whatever choice you make, I want you to do it from a place of strength and empowerment. I am not your bank. I am not your lender. I don't want you to remain uninformed and scared of doing anything but paying off your debt in full at interest forever. I want you to be informed. I want you to be empowered. I want you to know everything there is to know about this process. We still have so much more to discuss. I want you to be the CEO of the corporation of you, fully informed to go take care of your debt situation from that place of confidence and strength. That is my wish for you, and I am so grateful that you are here watching this video, taking this course with me in order to do that. That's all for the 6 ways to get out of debt, for the options that you really have to do that. I will see you in the next video where we're going to tackle the number 1 reason that do-it-yourself debt settlement fails.